All right, we're going to begin a series reviewing this book, Early Retirement Extreme, a philosophical and practical guide to financial independence. And this isn't going to be a traditional book review from the perspective of good, bad, and ugly. It's just going to be actually book highlights, some key takeaways that I found through kind of my study of this particular book, and just calling out a couple of things here. Early retirement extreme, and kind of what's meant by that, at least in this context, is this early retirement, kind of the thesis statement here is that if you follow some of the philosophical and practical principles in the book, you should be able to early retire in 5 years. And you might think that that is a bit extreme, and that's why it's called Early Retirement Extreme. Actually, the author, Jacob Fisker down here, who is a PhD, Jacob Lund Fisker, PhD, spends on average about $7,000 a year for total expenses. And now that, of course, is extreme. But what I would point out, and so you don't hear these figures and get immediately dismissive, I would use books like this and certain principles that you hear in the early retirement community simply as a mechanism to stretch your thinking. You might have this idea that, 5 years from now, or $7,000 a year is completely unattainable. And that's okay as you start out. I would just say have an open mind or open perspective, and that in the course of the principles and philosophical guidelines that we'll cover throughout these series of videos, it might open up a couple avenues in thinking and strategy that you previously never would have considered. So it's not that you follow steps 1 through 37 and you'll be able to retire in 5 years, or do the same thing and you'll be able to live on $7,000 a year. Just use it as a guide to kind of stretch your thinking, explore possibilities. So the next thing I'll mention here is that it has this subtitle, Practical and Philosophical. And for those folks that just haven't so you're oriented, if you pick up this book yourself, I would say it's probably 85% philosophical and, roughly 15% practical. And that is, as we'll cover in a couple of seconds with some highlighted quotes, that's by design. Because if you can master kind of the philosophical components, then you can create, or you can unlock your own practical strategies. So I think that's just good enough as an introduction. Well, one more thing, maybe. There's a PhD down here that I mentioned. And so if you get into this book yourself, you might have this sense that it's kind of academic in nature, which it is. And you might have this thought that it's kind of like a textbook, which it is. And so I'm just kind of framing it this way so expectations are set appropriately. Should you get into this book, get a copy of this book yourself. Of course, I recommend getting it from your local library. If they have a copy at your local library, get it for free. If not, we'll cover some highlights, like I said, throughout this series. Last thing before we get into quotes, I would just say I thought it was excellent. And we'll cover the highlights throughout this series. So this video is really an introduction. So let's get into some specific quotes here. This book isn't a how-to manual. Okay, so how-to manual to a specific lifestyle. It is not that. So it is not a how-to manual for a specific lifestyle, but it's a how-to manual. It's a how-to manual for how-to manuals. What that means here in this context is the intention is for each person to be able to create their own strategy, create their own strategy. So if you just look, I don't know the best way to draw this, but if this is you or me now, and this is you or me in the future when we are financially independent, a lot of books and a lot of guides will try to give you at least this kind of a step-by-step 1, 2, 34 different ways to save money, or steps to take to invest in the right things, and etc. Make $10 million with foreclosures, right? All these kind of strategies, if you will, or tactics. That's not this. So this is, again, a how-to guide, okay? It's basically a how-to of how-tos, so you can create your own strategy. You can create your own strategy. So that strategy might look like this. And these diagrams aren't meant to be a reflection of time. It's just a different pathway to get to the same result. Could be over here. And right, so you kind of want to be cautious of personal finance books or other kind of guides that say, do this, basically an algebraic formula, like, do X plus Y plus Z, and you will arrive at your glorious future, right? You want to master the strategies first. And then again, like I said, the tactics will follow from there. That being said, I think there is this is kind of my commentary here. There is a certain point when you're first starting out on this journey that a few concrete or practical steps can be very helpful, right? So you might be beginning a journey, like you might on a long road trip as an example, and you're just like, I just need to know kind of the couple of mile markers ahead of me. And that can be quite effective to have some concrete steps to get the ball rolling. But as you get going, you want to be able to kind of show or utilize strategy, utilize your strategy to be able to develop your own tactics. So let's get into one more quote here. Switch my colors back. So learn how to become financially independent requires study. Okay, so if you want to learn how to be financially independent, let's just highlight it. It requires study. This requires effort, and is not easy. If it was truly easy, everybody would be doing it. But it is no more difficult than getting a college education, or becoming a skilled tradesman in your respective field, right? The punchline here from a financial perspective is that, very large percentage of people, at least in the United States, grow up without having a basic understanding of fundamental financial concepts. Okay, so that's one side of the equation. But actually, as we'll see in future videos, the study part does require some of that to understand the basic math and financial concepts. But actually, there is the aspect of, right, spending less, saving more, right, and invest. Let's just say invest smarter. Okay, but really beyond that, right? This is important. These things are important, and there's a lot of really practical things and ways to do this. But actually, the larger piece of study, the larger components of studying, is live better. So the journey towards financial independence is actually a journey of learning how to live and live better. And we'll get into that. The last thing here, so related to living better, what I describe here, again, these are all quotes from the book. What I describe here is another kind of life. Okay? Another kind of life. The life of an independently wealthy and skilled, a modern Renaissance man. And I'll just cover this. This is my framework, not Jacob's. And we'll get into a lot of lot of videos on this concept of a Renaissance man, and actually in some context you could think of this as the entire overarching umbrella of our channel. But if you just think of Renaissance man as a whole man, in modern terminology it's a polymath, right? You can think of this as, you are built, an individual is built at least in 3 layers. And the first one, I'm just going to use a computer metaphor here. This is, so if you just say your hardware, this is kind of who you are by birth, your intelligence, kind of your overarching cognitive abilities. Yes, you can enhance these over time, but there is a certain kind of hard wiring, just like you might have in a computer from 1995 versus 2000 versus 2018. There are certain processing capabilities and storage capabilities that are kind of just there, like it says, hardwired. But on top of that, you have your OS, you have your operating system, and on top of that OS, you have apps. So a lot of times when people think of education or Renaissance man, they think here. And so in the metaphor, these are skills. They're knowledge that we need to go out and acquire. I don't know how to calculate the present value of multiple cash flows. Let me go learn that skill. And that's absolutely critical. If you want to be able, I don't know how to perform basic maintenance on my vehicle, I need to go out and learn that skill. Okay, a lot of content that we'll cover on our channel will be focused on skills. Okay, but actually, from my perspective, more important, or at least very foundational to this, is the overarching operating system. Okay, this is from, if you go back to the subtitle, there was a philosophical component and a practical component. If you look at skills as practical, the operating system is your philosophical. That is your fundamental orientation towards the world, how you view adversity, how you view quote unquote failure, how you have a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. These are all concepts that we'll get into in a lot of detail. These things here, these top 2 layers, is really what you can change the most. Okay, and this is where we will focus our energy here. So let's wrap up this video shortly. Before I get down there, this is a broadly skilled person, this idea of a Renaissance man, and actually throughout the book, the author kind of puts an indictment towards this concept of specialization, which is very common, at least in the United States, in terms of I get an education, but as I further my education, then I further my position in the workforce, there's this tendency to narrow, to specialize over and over, to the point where you might be able to know like the absolute specifics of molecular biology, but you don't even know how to change a tire on your car, right? It's very specialized and it's very niche, but you miss out on a lot of things related to having a widely skilled person. So I just wanted to conclude, this is not a quote from the book, but I thought it was pretty appropriate, from Robert Heinlein. A human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog, con a ship, design a building, write a sonnet, balance accounts, build a wall, set a bone, comfort the dying, take orders, give orders, cooperate, act alone, solve equations, analyze a new problem, pitch manure, program a computer, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, die gallantly. Specialization is for insects, right? This is the path that our education and kind of professional work environment sets us on, a specialization where we want to be, for the true kind of live better Renaissance man, Renaissance lifestyle is up here. We want to have a widely skilled skill set and be financially wealthy. All right, this was just an introduction to the book. We'll get into some more highlights as we progress forward.